Okay. Hopefully people will continue to trickle in, but thanks for joining our working group meeting. Today we're going to be focused on the bid normalized load impact metric. As we mentioned during our kickoff 2 weeks ago, the plan is to spend meetings kind of focus on these different elements of an incentive-based approach. And go through a sequence where we'll first introduce the topic, kind of lay out the problem space. Then we'll be inviting folks to submit proposals with their ideas on either alternatives to this or ways to improve it. And then spending the following meeting, kind of closing out that topic, considering at least what we're going to plan to test moving forward, and then introducing the next one. So here is our agenda for today. We do have a longer time today. People had said that they thought that would be helpful. So we have until 5. If we need to, we can take a short break in the middle. But there will be time for questions, I would say, especially when we get to, discussing the details of the bid normalized load impact. If you have questions, feel free to raise your hand. If we get tight on time, we might ask people to hold their questions till the end. But this is really for everyone's benefit, since for most of us, it's maybe been a little bit since we've thought about this in great detail, although I hope folks did have a chance to look over the report. So again, we'll do some intros, logistics, scheduling. Then I'll hand it over to Daniel to lay out the problem space. We'll discuss proposals and potential guardrails, and then move on to next steps. So hopefully, if you were able to join last time, this is basically the same slide. I'm Eleanor Adachi. I'm with the Energy Division. I'm also joined by David Oliver. A couple other of my CPUC colleagues, I think, are also on the line. And then we have Daniel and Eric from California Energy Commission. The main reason I wanted to show this is that I actually wanted to let everyone know that I will be handing off this role to David. I'll be stepping back from the commission fairly soon, although my last date is not totally determined, but it will probably be before our next working group meeting. It's been really wonderful working with all of you, but hopefully you will be in good hands with David. And if you do have questions, please feel free to direct them to him moving forward. And I'll also be sending this out to list so that everyone has his email. I say lots of sad faces. I will miss you all too. As far as logistics, I know it's a little bit delayed from our kickoff presentation, but we will be uploading these slides to the DR Workshops website. I think that since we didn't send out this deck in advance of this meeting, we'll try to do that right after this, at least to the working group, and then get the slides on the public website pretty soon. Again, you were all muted when you came in, and we would ask folks, unless they're actively speaking, to stay muted just to make sure that the sound quality remains good. But if you do have a question, like I said, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. And as always, make sure that you're aware of your surroundings, make sure that you're comfortable, and in case of emergency, call 911. So I think I'll hand it off to Daniel, although I can keep sharing slides if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that might make it a little easier. Yeah, just want to say hello again to everyone. This is a little section of the schedule that was sent out earlier, but just to reframe everyone as to what we are doing or sort of the cadence of what we're doing here. Today, we're really just trying to define this problem space and open up all the participants in this working group the opportunity to comment and submit proposals and adjustments. That due date is going to be next Wednesday. Hopefully, will allow us all to uh, review all the suggestions and comments that everybody proposes. But I want to put that on everybody's radar. I'll talk about it a little bit more detail at the very end. But that will tee up the next time we all meet virtually together, sort of going through each of those proposals and having an opportunity to discuss those in more detail. The aim is then to have another round of comments submitted by all working participants, working group participants, and working participants, but working group participants, and then reach a conclusion on this element at least by the end of August. We can probably go to the next slide. If anybody has any questions on this, happy to field that. But just wanted to sort of snapshot of what we're doing for each element. You can refer back to that schedule that we sent out. It has a little bit more detail. This is a visual representation of the same thing, but just to reemphasize what was said earlier, that we are going element by element. In September, we're going to start talking about the actual penalty that will be informed, of course, by this metric of performance. Stepping through a very similar cadence. This meeting, we have a little bit more time than we will on the September 7th one because we're not finalizing any element right now. We are we didn't have any additions to this list of elements, so consider that finalized. We can certainly add on some discussion points if needed, but yeah, please refer to the schedule as you see fit. At the very end, we'll have a sort of ultimate synthesis of all these elements that we'll present on sort of that last meeting in November, and then outline the next steps past December for how we'll continue this proceeding. If there are no questions on this right now, I'm happy to just go straight right along into the problem space, the next section here. So what I want to do first is just talk about what it is we're trying to do with this metric, and why we're spending time now.
Daniel, we do have a question from Lizette.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see the hand. Yes.
Good afternoon. This is Lizette Garcia from SDA. I'd like to clarify, when you said on your schedule to put together proposals for bid normalization, load impacts, are you expecting that kind of the proposals will be only around using bid data, or are you guys will be open for the participants to propose a different way to obtain the DRQC values?
Yeah, I think we'll hopefully clarify some of that shortly. I think we're aiming to have the sort of goals that I'll go over shortly be addressed in every proposal. I don't think we call out explicitly that it has to be using bid data. I would allow other staff to chime in on this, but I think we're open to having a range of proposals, but the idea is having a metric that gauges the performance of a resource. And if there's a way that a participant wants to address that, that is up to them and to explain that.
Yeah, I would say just maybe quickly, Lizette, to the extent that, someone wants to submit a proposal that's not based on bid data, so that, kind of the more it diverges from what was in the CEC proposal, just the more detail we would hope that people would provide, since we do have to, present back to the working group, and we want to make sure that we have a shared understanding of what's being proposed. That would be the main thing, in addition to kind of meeting all the goals that Daniel is going to lay out. Just like providing enough context so that we all are on the same page about what exactly is being proposed.
Thank you.
Great. So I guess I'll sort of allude to using bids on this slide, but again, as mentioned, if there's an alternative that any participants want to put forward, I think we're open to it, just having that be a little bit, yeah, as Eleanor just said, a little bit more explained. So to start off with, hopefully everybody appreciates the need to have some performance metric in this process. What we're proposing is that whatever metric we're using in this incentive based proposal, that it is consistent across all DR resources, and we want that so that it is a fair metric, and recognizing that there's a wide variety of DR resources out there, variety of organizations that participate in DR. We want to make sure that this metric is consistent and standardized across every single type of DR. In addition to that, and this is sort of getting into the bid category of, we're hoping that we are also having a performance metric that is accurately assessing both, I guess, this balance between actual performance and resource availability. What we're meaning by that is understanding that the load impact that is assessed should not incentivize or should demonstrate the full capacity of a resource. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we sort of in the load impacts slide, where we're talking about other things that we've proposed or that have been on the table that maybe don't work particularly well. But recognizing that there are as the CAISO settlements or other methods of assessing load impact that don't necessarily capture the full capability of a resource. Things like partial dispatches from CAISO or yeah, generally speaking, there may be a discrepancy there, and we want to make sure that that is aligned. Part of that is also making sure that we're using the most accurate available estimate of load impact. This kind of gets into the category. It gets into the discussion of what baselines we're using, and recognizing that using CAISO settlements or using some baselines that maybe have been de facto part of this process thus far aren't ideal in all circumstances. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the very end of this section, but just wanted to flag that here as another point of this metric, is that we're using the most accurate load impact that we can in plugging into the assessment of performance. If this is sort of the guiding principles that we have right now. If we want to talk anything more about this, we can do that now. Otherwise, I'll go through and we'll start to talk about some of the things that have been proposed and the shortcomings that have come along with those, that maybe will give a little bit of clarity as to how we arrived at the bid normalized load impact to begin with. So assuming this is clear, yep. The first step along the way was using just raw load impacts. So as mentioned, that there is often an issue here where what a resource is bidding in to the CAISO market is not necessarily what it is dispatched at. This presents an issue in that there's no way for a resource to demonstrate its capacity if it isn't dispatched by CAISO. What we're hoping to avoid in adjustments or sort of a departure from just using raw load impacts is that there's a incentive right now for a resource to bid in extremely high and then deviate from the dispatch instructions so that it can demonstrate that it has the capacity to meet this qualifying capacity. Obviously, this isn't a particularly it will not ultimately be the way that we do performance metrics, but wanted to sort of put it out there as the initial starting point.
Daniel,
yeah.
Can I chime in here?
Certainly.
Yeah, I just want to drive home a point I think you were making. But you know, if a PDR resource is dispatched for a small fraction of its bid, you know, if we just use and they were able to meet that dispatch, they sort of demonstrate that they met their, you know, 10% of their overall bid. If we just plug that into some kind of formula that would eventually go into a qualifying capacity, you know, that would probably make that resource look really bad, right? It only delivered 10% of its bid. But in fact, that's what we wanted the resource to do in that situation. So I think just to drive the point home that, you know, the reason we kind of started moving towards bid normalized load impacts, which we'll get to, is just like starting to think about like, well, how do we account for situations when that happens?
Right.
Back to you.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. What we're trying to avoid is that there's an opportunity for, or we're trying to create an opportunity for resources to demonstrate that they have a capacity and still be incentivized to actually meet the instructions from CAISO. So I guess we can move through to one way to address some of the concerns here, not completely, was by using an average via a per customer load impact, which we can.
Before you move on, Daniel,
Yeah.
I think Alok has his hand raised.
I don't see. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. This is Alok from Energy Division. I was thinking about the approach you were describing. I was wondering if the framework that you have in mind, have you thought about whether it is appropriately applied at the resource ID level versus the portfolio level, given that, you know, resources are divided up in small chunks for resource ID, let's call it administrative purpose. I sometimes feel like resource ID is an artificial construct to rely on. So just having trouble articulating my thought here, but the basic question is resource ID what we want to focus on, or the set of all resource IDs in a given geography like sublab?
Yeah, I can try to take this one. I think how we wrote it in the report, I'll have to go back and look at the exact language, but I think we're kind of agnostic between the two. You can sort of have aggregations that are, you know, aggregations of aggregations, right? Like if a resource ID is itself an aggregation, you can still look at multiple resource IDs and how they perform together. So I don't think we've necessarily decided on doing it resource ID by resource ID.
Okay, thank you.
Right, and maybe that also gets into sort of averaging out by, or creating a load impact that is sort of an average in itself, and per customer load impacts, which is one way to address that there may be resources or sublapse or some aggregation of resources that are not dispatched altogether, and taking some of whatever the load impact is divided by the customers that are in fact dispatched, maybe creates a better metric for performance across an entire portfolio. One thing that this does not account for is the variability in those resources. This may work well for or geographies in which there's similar conditions, or customers or resources rather are well suited to have similar capacities, but it may be inflated or deflated if a specific customer is dispatched. We've called out here that there may be a way to address this by doing some sort of weighted averages for what contribution a specific customer might make. We're sort of leaving that door open, but are not proposing any solution here right now to that. But wanted to open up also as a consideration that there may be some way to address concerns in the raw load impacts by having some average by dispatch customers.
We have a question from Luke.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. My name is Luke Tugas. I'm a consultant for the California Efficiency and Demand Management Council. Thanks for this workshop today. What I'm hearing so far is a lot of terminology and concepts that sound a lot like the load impact protocols. And with regards specifically to this notion of per customer load impacts, I am concerned that we're getting away from how the resource adequacy regime actually works. And for now, I'm just going to talk about the current regime, and obviously things will change, with the slice of day. But the point is that right now resource IDs, and this addresses Luke's question as well. Resource IDs are assigned QC values, at least for DR resources and portfolios that are on supply plans, and of course that's all the third-party DR providers. And so the performance of each individual resource has to be consistent with their QC value, and that's really the scale, or the at which we should be looking at performance, in my opinion. Now the problem, I was going to wait till later on to bring this up, but one of the big problems here that we're dealing with in terms of what the landscape is now, that's going to be that I'm concerned we're going to keep bumping up against in this effort, is the fact that the utilities DR programs are not required to be on their supply plans, and so there's no real obligation on their part to bid into their consistent with their QC values, whereas the opposite requirement, whereas third-party DR providers are subject to that requirement. And so unless we address that issue, then either implicitly or explicitly, then we're not going to have a lot of, well, first of all, we're not going to have an equitable approach here that treats everybody equally. But also, I'm not convinced it's going to be effective. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric Lyon, CEC. I should have introduced myself, but I think this is maybe a question I would sort of redirect to Energy Division staff, which is that there are a lot of recommendations in the initial report, and I think what you were getting at, Luke, is sort of one of them, which is, let's treat all DR resources the same, regardless of whether they're IOU third-party resources. And there are a couple of specific issues that they asked us to kind of focus on. And so, for the purposes of this conversation, we're focusing on bid normalized impacts as sort of one step in kind of the methodology, one link in the chain. But, so I guess the question to CPUC staff is, to what extent we should consider, the other elements of the program, like showing all DR on supply plans, for example, sort of, guidance from the CPUC. And I think this is maybe not a question that we need to address right now. It's a bit of an aside, but maybe one that we can circle back to internally and figure out.
Yeah, I think we might need to confer on this one offline. I think the thing I would say at this point is that if you go back all the way to when this working group process started in 2021, I think the commission does have a goal of having a unified methodology across different types of DR, whether it's utility or third party. And I think that, to the extent that we do find a methodology that works for everyone, that we would also, try to align some of those other requirements across resource types. In terms of, the exact timing of those things, I don't think I can speak to that, but I guess I wouldn't, necessarily think that the DR framework that we're operating in today is going to be the framework of the future, with slice of day, a lot of other changes on demand response. It's kind of a moving target, and I wouldn't necessarily, restrict yourself to thinking that everything else is going to stay the same and it's just QC that's going to change. I think we are, charged with coming up with kind of, what the long-term vision is going to be. And if you need to like caveat your proposals with, I am assuming that this is going to apply. I think those kinds of things would be important to know. Does that help, Luke?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't want to have Daniel here in his presentation or anything like that. But I just want to, because this issue is to come up a little bit, I want to make sure I just get that comment out there. And I hear you, Eleanor, and we'll just, take things as they come. Thank you. And thank you, Eric, as well.
All right. In the interest of time, can move on to the slide if you're ready, Daniel.
Actually,
I can take over here.
Okay.
So in the last slide Daniel showed, we basically said the most simple way to sort of account for these partial dispatches is take the per customer load impact of the ones that were dispatched and then multiply it by the total, number of customers you have. And we think, that's sort of an okay first cut, but there are definitely some issues with it. So what we proposed in the final report that we submitted to the CPUC is this concept of bid normalized load impact. The idea is that you're taking the bid amount and you're scaling it by the percent of the dispatch that was actually met. And you can really see that sort of where this arrow is pointing to the sloped portion of the line. That's where this is, especially true. Then once you get to above, if you've delivered more than you were dispatched for, you're still just getting the bid amount, right? I think a good example of this is if you are, well, to use this example here, if you have bid 100 and you deliver 50, you're dispatched for 50 and you deliver 50. No, sorry, you deliver 60 on a dispatch of 50. That's 20% more than what you were dispatched for. But do we think that's evidence that you could deliver 20% more than your total bid, which would be 120? Probably not. And so this kind of both gives you the benefit of the doubt if you are able to meet the dispatch that you were given from the CAISO, but doesn't give you a big incentive to sort of go above and beyond that, which I think the CAISO will support me when I say is really important. There's one point in the working group process earlier where I proposed a slightly different definition, and I think a few folks noted that it might sort of have this distorting effect where it would really encourage DR providers to try to deliver more than what was dispatched. And so this is what we've initially proposed, and ED staff, to their credit, took a look at this and noticed this could lead to some undesirable bidding behavior, where maybe you bid kind of a small amount that is very much attainable at a low dollar amount, low price, and then you bid sort of a big number of megawatts at a high price that is unlikely to get dispatched. And then as long as you can sort of meet that smaller partial dispatch, you can get credit for the whole amount that you bid, even if it was quite unreasonable. So there's a few different ways to address this. One I will note before we move on is maybe just some accounting for what the price, the bid price was. To maybe say that if you are bidding, a lot of megawatts at $1,000 when the clearing price was, just a couple hundred, maybe that should be given less weight. We've done a little bit of thinking on this and have not really found a great solution, but I just wanted to throw it out there that, maybe folks on the call want to think about. But instead, we've added some other guardrails. You can go to the next slide, please. And let's see, so in the original process, OhmConnect came up with this idea of sort of a minimum dispatch quantity. We proposed 20% of the bid. This is not really a magic number, so we can definitely adjust that number. Maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 50%, I don't know. But as proposed with a 20% cutoff, it sort of shows that elbow where you get from the sort of proportion of the dispatch that you hit to where it flattens out. That's never going to be below 20%. And what this does is it constrains the ratio of bid normalized impacts that comes out of this formula to what you actually were able to deliver and demonstrate in a given dispatch, to a ratio of 5 to 1. So you're never going to get a bid normalized impact value of 100 off of a delivery of 1 megawatt, right? You can't be sort of multiplying your small deliveries at like an infinite rate. The most you can ever sort of multiply by is 5. On the other side, and I think even with that in place, PUC staff noted, you can still do that. It just constrains the amount by which you can do that. And so, we thought a good idea is not necessarily a bid cap. We tried very careful not to call it a bid cap, but a price cap. And how a price cap would work is we would only, for the purposes of calculating BNLI, include bids up to a certain cost or a certain price. Again, we've proposed 600. Again, there's nothing magic about that number, and it's open for debate. But the idea being that you know, we'd want it sort of at a price that is, you know, reasonably likely to be dispatched under a pretty, you know, high load, you know, peak type day. Not, you know, sort of all the way up at the CAISO bid cap. And so one thing that does is it allows you to still bid above that. And if you're dispatched for, you know, say the amount that you bid all the way up to like $800 or $900, you would get credit for that. And it's only when, say, you know, you're being dispatched for 20% of your bid up to $600 that we would use that that amount bid. So it's kind of like a happy medium as we see it between a bid cap and, you know, which was, I think, proposed by CPUC previously. Luke.
Thanks, Eric. So first of all, I do want to come out, you know, pretty strong against, you know, price cap, bid cap. It's, you know, I guess you can call it whatever. It still, you know, results in the same thing. And, you know, given that there was a price cap or a bid cap approved by the, you know, commission, just by the CPUC, excuse me, just 2 months ago or a month and a half ago, that I would really like to see, you know, any sort of additional bid cap taken off the table. I think that's not appropriate to put another one out there as soon as, you know, one has been approved, and that has not even been deployed yet. So that's one bit of feedback. The other thing is that, and probably, you know, more importantly, is that I would recommend that whatever approach used be as simple as possible. And the problem that you're trying to solve here, at least I think you're trying to solve through the use of a bid cap or price cap, and, you know, bending the elbow at 20%, all this sort of thing, is, well, the need to do that is driven by one single factor, at least in my view, and that is that, not, as I said earlier, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, utilities are not required to bid their QC values into the ISO market. All you have to do to create that motivation for people to bid or to deliver as close to their bids as possible is to require that they are bidding their QC values. And if, with an understanding that if they do not do that, and if they do not, you know, deliver on those bids as they're scheduled, then they're going to have they're going to get derated in the future, or penalized. I guess that's what, you know, the purpose of this whole discussion here ultimately.
So just to make sure I'm hearing you right, I'm going to echo some things back, but I think your sort of the solution you're moving towards is actually requiring IOUDR to submit bids equal to their qualifying capacity.
Yeah, because this requirement applies currently to third-party DR, and so they're already motivated to do this. But on the utility side, they're not subject to that requirement currently. So simply by taking this, here we're calling it a bid normalized load impact. You almost need to have either another step in this or another axis showing bids relative to QC values, right? And so if your bids are not, you need your bids to be consistent with your QC values, but also your performance, you know, your actual dispatches or deliveries, using the terminology here, need to be consistent with those QC values as well.
Yeah.
Yes, Luke, I think, or Luke, did you want to go first?
Well, I guess I wanted to clarify something from Luke. The utilities are required to bid the available capacity, which could vary from the QC value that's designated in the, you know, on the RA filings. So are you making, so when you make your comment, you have that distinction in mind that, I mean, you acknowledge that they are required to bid available capacity. So does that change your comment?
No, because look, what I'm trying to differentiate between here is bidding available capacity. In other words, the capability of the DR program or resource, let's say, at any given day, versus the requirement that third-party providers are subject to, which is to bid their QC values regardless of what their capabilities are on any given day. And the big difference is the big difference there is that as we saw in the Department of Market Monitoring's 2022 DR report, they demonstrate clearly that utility DR programs on the hottest days of the year would not being bid even remotely close to their QC values. Now I'm not, and so presumably that would be considered a problem. And someone needs to come out or go on mute here. I think
someone has some background noise.
Ansel Lundberg, maybe.
I'm sorry
Being
about
a
that.
call, I might.
I was just unmuted there.
Thank you. So hopefully that answered your question, Alok.
Yeah. So I guess you're trying to get at some methodology that accounts for deviation between what was actually bid versus the RA designated QC value.
Yeah, I mean that was my understanding. The whole purpose of this incentive-based method was to create an incentive. Was to ensure that, and I always presumed this was the PUC's priority as well. That
Right.
DR capacity deliveries are consistent with their QC values, and that's as manifested in their dispatches in the ISO market. And so that should apply to both utility DR as well as third-party DR. But
Right.
as I just said, that's not, there's nothing in place now that requires the utilities to do that. And without such a requirement, either in the form of, a characteristic or requirement contained within, this BNLI proposal, or a broader, commission requirement approved in the separately, then you're never going to get there. And also, it's continuing to treat third party and DR IOU DR very, very differently.
Right. So I think I'm understanding. I mean, just to make sure I'm understanding, I think if I summarize your comment as your criticism of BNLI is that it's focusing on delivery versus bid, but not accounting for the bid itself being a shortfall relative to the already required QC.
That's correct. And maybe I'm getting ahead of the CEC folks. It's been a while, Eric, since I looked at the CEC proposal, but that's the key that I want to make sure that we're considering here. We're not forgetting. Thank you.
Got it. I'll put it back to the working group hosts.
Thanks. I do see a hand. Can I just respond to Luke's comments real quick?
Sure.
Thanks. Yeah, so Luke, I think what I'm, the other part of what I'm hearing is there's just a desire to align the third party and the IOU, practices and requirements. I think, as I understand it, and CPUC folks, tell me if this jives with what you're thinking as well. But I'd prefer to move the other direction, which is to release third-party DR providers from having to bid their QC rather than requiring that of IOU DR resources. And I think the reason, I mean, we're not quite getting to it in this presentation, but like the QC versus, the QC is going to be eventually compared to sort of bid normalized load impacts in a way. I'm going to hand wave that for a second here. And that's where sort of the requirement to meet or exceed their QC is going to come in. So it's not an everyday bids, because I think we all know that weather sensitive resources have variable capabilities under different conditions. And so it's really, it's not that we want them bidding their QC every day. We want them bidding their QC or above on days that are, as hot or hotter than the worst days. Peak day, work day, worst day, whichever we sort of call it in the old and new QC paradigms or RA paradigms.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that sounds, fine. Yeah, I guess, we'll see how the details look like, of course, Eric. But the principle that I'm just hoping that we can all agree upon is there needs to be equal treatment. And whether you want to move the needle, move the standard from one way or, from the right to the left, so to speak, that's fine. I just want to make sure we're all, everyone's playing on the same field.
Yeah, I think the CEC for our part, we definitely support that.
Thanks.
See Noor and Lizette. I think Noor, you were first.
Eric, can you just clarify, this is Noor from Olivine, can you just clarify that 20%? So that means if the dispatch was under 20% of the bid quantity, that the bid normalized load impact would be 5 times the like the performance.
So the example is if the dispatch quantity is 15% of the bid quantity.
Yes, and if it was 100% performance, then it would be 75% of the bid quantity is what you'd consider the
So
impact.
to use that example, that event would simply be discarded. We'd say there's just not enough data here from this 15% to extrapolate up to the full bid quantity.
Okay, yeah, that's how it's specified, like for the TSGS guidelines.
Yes.
I think there is a thing here that this does give still a very generous. So if a DR aggregator did like 100% performance, getting a 20% dispatch, they would get counted better than an aggregator that did like 95% performance with 100% dispatch. Maybe that's okay because they're closer to their bid quantities, their actual word quantity. But that is something here that could be a little bit of something that could be gamed a bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would appreciate you doing some thinking on that and see if you can think of any good solutions. But I'll take that as an action item as well. Thanks.
I guess one potential thing would be to do the weighting based on the actual award, so that like it would count. If you're doing the price weighting, for example, it would count less. Even if you did the performance the same, that the weighting would be less if they had a lower award quantity.
That's a good point. We could add something along the lines of weights as like a percent of dispatch, something like that. Or sorry, percent of bid.
I think Lizette, you had a hand next.
Good afternoon. This is Lizette Garcia from SDNE. I would like to ask a question. How the bid data will be related for resources that are weather sensitive? How be the relation between your proposal versus resources that are weather sensitive?
Yeah, I don't know, Eric, do you have a slide later on the temperature regression?
Not in this one, not in the slide deck.
Okay, and the second question that I have is that is this proposal using baseline data?
That we do have a slide on in a couple. So maybe I'll just hold off on that question and circle back to it in about 2 slides.
Okay, thank you.
And I think Alok and then Louis.
Just clarification on the x-axis, the percent delivered. Is the 2-hour percent counts the same as the 4-hour percent if they're the same?
This is on an interval basis. So, you know, there's probably a little bit more work to figure out how to, you know, like I'm assuming that all these load impacts are done hourly, so everything's going to be wrapped up to an hourly level.
Oh,
So yeah, this would represent a 1-hour dispatch and bid and everything.
Which I think effectively means that longer dispatches, like each hour, would count separately, right, Eric?
Correct.
okay.
And then I think Louis, and then I think we should probably move on. Louis, are you able to come off mute?
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, I have a question about the $600 megawatts hour. Is this proposed by who? By CPUC or by CEC? I mean, it's kind of high, very high to me. I just don't know where this come from.
Yeah, and I think this was an idea that originated with CPUC, but I think it might have been more accurate to say this is a CEC sort of proposal. It's also not one, not a proposal that was in the original, you know, report that we filed. This is just a sort of a new guardrail idea. I will note that we implemented it for the demand side grid support program as a guardrail in that program. So we'll sort of see how that goes.
Okay, so this is still proposed. Yeah, it's kind of, to me, I think it's very, very high. I don't know why it's. Also, I have another question. You said delivery, you reach 100%. Do you allow continued delivery more than? So do you allow 120%?
Yes, and I think the example of that is if right, so if the bid quantity is only what you bid up to $600, but if you bid additional above that and were dispatched, say the clearing price is $800 and you know bid another 20% at $800, then at that point your bid normalized load impact is just equal to whatever your delivered value is. So it's just the load impact at that point. There's no sort of you know, correction for the percentage that you bid or anything like that.
Okay.
If you don't mind, Luke, I think we should probably move on to the next slide at least. And then hopefully, if we have time at the end, we can take more questions.
So I'm sorry to add more math than even there was before, but the definition that we provided in the report is in sort of generic terms, and I just wanted to show you how we sort of refine this definition for implementing in the demand side grid support program. So the upper equation is what we saw on the last slide, and the lower equation is what is in the demand side grid support program guidelines. And so we you know, there's a few refinements we made, like, you know, we realized calling it bids is maybe not as precise as we wanted to be, so we called it offer, which is the sum of both bids and self schedules. in the real-time market. We defined delivered as the CAISO's value of demand response energy measurement, or DREM. This is based on the CAISO baselines that, Lizette, you were asking about earlier. So we're not proposing that for the purposes of calculating QC. That was really just an expedient way to make this happen and implement it quickly. And the dispatched amount is the total expected energy. Again, this is sort of defined in CAISO's world, and so is very easy to sort of take, and plug right into this formula. A couple things to note about this. So I do think we should relax DREM to include better methods for developing baselines and everything. The other sort of yellow flag thing that I've noted here is that this is all defined in the real-time market. And I haven't done a whole lot of thinking about whether this would be an issue for long start resources. I think if they were self-scheduled, it would be fine, but I don't think we'd know what to do when they didn't get dispatched in the day ahead market. So I just want to kind of throw that out there as a question for the group. Because effectively what this definition would do is if you are a long start resource, you don't get dispatched, you would effectively be bidding or offering 0 in the real-time market. So you'd have a lot of cases where you'd have effectively a bid normalized load impact of 0. And then we did impose the 2 guardrails that I mentioned on the previous slide, the price cap and the total expected energy has to be at least 20% of the offer amount. As Nora pointed out. So anyway, this is just to say this is a slightly more specific definition of the same concept. I see a couple hands from Christy. Oh, and Luke.
I just wanted to add to, I think you said self-schedule, but yeah, demand response can't just self-schedule in the market only if they have a day ahead award, because we have the net benefit threshold. So that was just FYI. Okay, yeah. So we'll double check our language on that, but those are basically schedules that are locked in from the day ahead market. Is that correct? If you get a day ahead award, you can self-schedule that into real time. I think for RDRR, it's automatic self-schedule, but no DR in day ahead or real time can just self-schedule absent. Yeah, only in real time if there's a day ahead award associated with that capacity. Yes, yeah. So assuming this is following CAISO rules, there won't be self-scheduled unless it was from a day ahead award. Is that correct? Do I have that good? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Phew. Let's see, Luke.
Thanks, Eric. With regard to the the real-time market element of this, or your question that you had about long start DR, I mean, again, I would recommend you try to make this as simple as possible, and I think I don't have a percentage in my head, but I think a lot of DR, maybe even a majority of it, is long start, and so maybe just focus on the day ahead market, so that you can have. So you're not, giving long start resources 0 scores or anything like that. Again, you don't want to punish people, customers or resource or DR providers because they're not able to, dispatch very, very quickly, on short notice. And that's just a function of what customers are capable of doing. And then something else I want to say, using the term guardrails, to describe, a bid cap. What a bid cap is, it's a distortion to the market. The ISO market is supposed to be based upon, the accurate, bids reflecting the opportunity cost of the resources, whether they're fossil generators or aggregations of customers that we call demand response. And so once we start adopting these quote unquote guardrails, what that is doing is it's going to discourage customers with higher opportunity costs from participating in the market. And I know this all sounds great on paper, but the very real outcome is going to be pushing customers out of the market. And you know, I'm presuming that's not the intention here, but you know, at some point you have to let the market do what the market's going to do, and not try to control every little lever of it. Thank you.
Yeah, Luke, I guess I think, and I saw some comments in the chat. I guess I just want to point out that I think what Eric is describing is not really a bid cap. It's really a cap on the multiplier, that you wouldn't get this multiplier effect if your prices were over a certain threshold. And kind of that benefit of the doubt in terms of the dispatch being far below the bid, and if you deliver 100%, and you get that scaled up to your full bid. There's nothing in this proposal, you know, says what people may or may not do in the CAISO market. It's just if we use CAISO market data as the basis for qualifying capacity, you know, to what extent are we going to give people a boost if their dispatches were below their bids?
Yeah, and I take your point, Eleanor, and thank you for that. But you know, at the same time, it's applying a differential treatment, and again, because these are these are residential and commercial customers who, you know, for whatever reasons can, you know, have different opportunity costs, and so you're in effect you're denying the opportunity to benefit, to benefit from this extra treatment here. To customers who cannot, who don't have a low opportunity cost. So that's just something to consider, and because really that's what this is regardless of how well intentioned you are in this effort or with this idea.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. I do in principle sort of agree, and you know, somebody mentioned the recent CPUC decision in stating the $949 price cap. I was actually really glad to see that, and not sorry, that's a bid cap. I would say that is a true bid cap. I was glad to see they went with the higher proposal number rather than a lower one. I think for the same reasons that you are talking about. I think again here, you know, there is an opportunity for, you know, if there is a high opportunity cost to do a little bit more, and you know, you're willing to do that if you can be compensated. That is sort of one of the reasons that we include kind of the safety valve. Maybe if you go back one slide, please, Eleanor. Sort of when you that sloped area to the right of the bid line, you know, so that's bids up to whatever the price, you know, cap or threshold, whatever we want to call it is. But if you can bid at higher prices and be dispatched at higher prices, you'll get compensated for that opportunity cost by having a higher bid normalized load impact number that comes out of that, that will factor into your capacity. So I don't know if that's any comfort, but that is part of the reasoning behind that.
I think we have a hand from Nor, and then I think we should move on to the next slide.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but like, since this is all based on performance, any hour, like putting aside partial dispatches, if you bid over 600 and you don't get dispatched, that's equivalent to having zero performance for that hour. Is that not right?
I guess the question is whether if you bid and you're not dispatched, would it count towards BNLI? Is that correct?
I can take a stab. I think that's correct if all of your capacity is bid at a price over $600.
Yeah. So like in that sense, it is, I mean, it's not a like it is equivalent to a bid cap. That, I mean, yes, you can bid higher, but like it's a pretty hefty penalty if you don't get awarded and you bid higher than 600.
Yeah, so I mean, yes, it would encourage, bidding some amount of capacity at 600, but it wouldn't be required to be your whole capacity. Right. I think to Eleanor's earlier point, it's the amount of capacity will give you the benefit of the doubt on.
So is it like as long as you bid at least 20% of your capacity under 600, there's no penalty?
I don't think that's exactly how it works, but I may have not quite followed the thought there.
So like, yeah, let's say you have a megawatt and you bid 200 kilowatts at 300, and then 200 to a megawatt at 800. How would that be treated? Assuming you don't get an award. Or
maybe let's take this offline so we can do some math. I think doing some examples is certainly in order. And if you could maybe write that example in the chat so we can make sure to cover it.
yeah, can I
I guess
send
one thing that was changed, Nor, that maybe isn't clear, is that it's not per bid. I think this is per dispatch. And then there's an adjustment based on what you bid. So if you weren't dispatched at all, it wouldn't factor into the bid normalized load impact.
But if you bid too high, that's my point. Like if you bid too high and you aren't dispatched, then that's equivalent to bidding. I mean, that would be equivalent to say bidding a lower price and getting dispatched and having zero performance. But I can communicate offline with you.
Yeah, no, I think that is right. If you bid the entirety of your capacity at $800, there's no dispatch. I think you would be awarded zero, as proposed.
I'm seeing a couple comments on having examples. I think we can try to follow up on that. I think that we had discussed that coming into this. But also say, if we are able to provide some examples, we'd really hope that that's a starting place for people to think about, what kinds of adjustments or improvements they would make. Although we really do appreciate all the questions here. This is really just a conversation starter for proposals that folks will present. We'll submit next week and then we'll present in 2 weeks. I think we're gonna move on. And then I think after this, maybe we'll take a very short break and then come back.
Thanks, Eleanor. Yeah, just totally echo what you're saying, that, this is what we've come up with. It is not the end all be all. So there's open invitation for everyone to do their own thinking on this and figure out what would work. So this is getting to, I think it was Lizette's question about baselines. I think the way we talk about baselines, it's always the counterfactual. We're not specifically talking about 10 and 10 baselines or anything like that. We would include something like a comparison group baseline. We would call that a baseline. So it really just becomes a matter of which baseline are we choosing. From the report, the language was, use the same baseline for settlement and ex post evaluation, unless there's a better one that you can't use for settlement. And I think this maybe rubs some people the wrong way. And I was thinking about why recently, and I sort of thought about a proposed reframing of this one. And it's really that, whichever ex post evaluation baseline method you use for the purposes of QC, if you can, you should use that for CAISO settlement. This is sort of anchoring our guidance on the ex post evaluation method, which should be the best one, right? The most accurate one that we are able to come up with. But at the same time, it sort of communicates this preference for consistency, but also we know we can't, right now, especially comparison groups, really not possible for settlement just because it takes too long to get all that data and refine it and everything. There may be a time where we can implement comparison groups for ex post evaluation for third parties, and we're still thinking about that. But if we can do that, we wouldn't preclude it from being used in ex post evaluation simply because you can't use it for CAISO settlement. So just a thought there. It's really getting at the same thing. I just thought this might be a better way to communicate it.
All right, thanks, Eric.
Those are all the slides we have, so I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, I think we have some next steps. I guess I propose maybe if we want to take a short break, maybe if folks can be ready to refocus at 4:19, and then we can go for another 30 minutes or so. And if there are any outstanding questions, we can address those too. So I'll put the return time in the chat.
Eleanor, if it would be helpful, I would be happy to pull some slides from the previous working group that have a little bit more context about how bid normalized impact is used. I think those of us who have been talking about it a lot were steeped in it, but it seems like some people might need a refresher on how these are actually going to feed into the QC methodology.
Okay, yeah, that might be helpful. Yeah, I think we'll probably go through next steps, but if you want to pull some stuff that you already have, and maybe we can do that in like the last 10 minutes or something.
Okay, that sounds good. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. The folks are coming back. Give people another couple seconds. Okay. I think we'll go ahead and get started. And just as a reminder, we're going to go over next steps, and then hopefully once we do that, we'll still have some time to keep answering questions at the end and for any other discussion.
Yeah, I think we almost certainly will at least have time for questions on the next steps, and hopefully they will clarify what we're asking for in the proposals and sort of the follow-ups on this conversation. But yeah. So as alluded to or explicitly mentioned earlier, we are opening up for submissions due August 16th. I want to reiterate that most of this conversation is around the idea that not to respond to a specific proposal, but for working group participants to submit proposals for the goals that were outlined earlier. That is to have some performance metric. There were a number of concerns that were raised in this presentation around some routes that we as staff have and also other participants have proposed that should be acknowledged, especially if there's a proposal that is dependent on one of the slides that we've gone over already. But this is again a forum for other ideas to come up, and we welcome any proposal so far as that they are working towards the goals that were outlined earlier. I guess also on this, calling out that if we're in any of these proposals departing from some of the terminology that we've been using thus far, just would ask for sort of an additional explanation and making sure that we're all using the same language when we're talking about bids or settlements or delivered or dispatches, anything to that effect. And again, as I had mentioned earlier, this is ultimately so that we can come back together the next time we meet on August 24th. We can go to the next slide and kind of go over what that'll look like. And we're going to invite all of the participants that submit proposals on this metric to present their adjustments and suggestions to the larger group. Right now, we're proposing that will be a 10-minute presentation, pending how many proposals we receive, or how many presenters are interested in sharing with the larger group. That may be subject to change, but hopefully that will allow all of us to fully engage with the full range of comments and proposals that are submitted. We are inviting, or we're asking for those to be submitted to staff a little bit later than the written comments on August 22nd. So that'll be a couple of days before the next meeting that we have virtually. But hopefully we'll allow enough time for everybody to review the submissions from other participants, and have a formulation that is shareable with everybody else by the next time that we meet. And afterwards have an opportunity to again have another round of comments and suggestions from all working group participants on the various proposals that will be presented. So hopefully that was clear from the schedule that we shared earlier, but just for a little bit more resolution, if there are questions on those logistics, if we want to go back to talking about some of the more substantive points with regards to what was on the slides. I see Luke's got his hand up. We can do that now.
Thank you, Daniel. Actually, I had, forgive me, I wasn't able to track what you were saying about like logistics and next steps and all that. Can you just go through sequentially? So my understanding is that proposals are due on the 16th, correct?
Yeah.
And then presentations are going to be 8 days later, right, on the 24th?
Right, because we won't be meeting until the 24th.
Right.
Or sorry, we're not, sorry, the presentations won't be due on the 24th. The presentations will be due 2 days before that meeting so that we can review them and then arrange them in a presentation and be slide master on it.
Got it. Oh, I'm sorry. I misspoke. I meant giving the presentations on the 24th. Got it.
Right,
And
right, right.
then you mentioned something about, I'm looking at the slide now, written comments. Are written comments due after August 24th, where parties submit comments on the proposals?
Right.
I
There
think
will
in
be an
this case,
opportunity to do.
comments are, I think he's referring to the proposals that are due next Wednesday. So if you want to make a slight adjustment between what you submit next Wednesday and then what you present, I think that's what that was referring to.
Sorry, yeah. On the you're in reference to that first bullet point, the written proposals and comments, yeah, is if you are not interested in submitting a full proposal but want to comment on one of the concerns that was raised in this presentation, I think we would be open to receiving those as well, as opposed to a full proposal on a comprehensive metric. We'd prefer that, and I think that would be more conducive to a presentation. But yeah, that the clarification on the language there.
Okay, thank you.
I also want to add a couple other logistics. I would say that in terms of written, I think that given that this is a working group process, we can be a little bit flexible with that. It could be anything from like a Word document where you go into great detail to like slides with a spreadsheet that kind of, add a little bit more color to what you're proposing. I say that the presentation itself, you should be prepared to speak about what you want to share. But that if you don't have like, a 20-page document ready by next Wednesday, that's okay, as long as it has enough information for other people in this working group to understand the proposal or your feedback, kind of on its own, without necessarily, a lot of explanation. I'll also add that we'd appreciate if you could submit these to the working group leads. So we'll send out an email. And then if you can just reply, it'd be great if you could send it to Daniel and David, since they'll be kind of coordinating this working group from now on. And then we'll make sure that the materials get out to the rest of the working group participants.
Right. I might call out that it does seem that people have made requests from us, and it may be wise for anybody who's thinking about submitting a proposal or comments in a written format to include examples in an appendix or some I think version that people can, I think, have a illustration of how that proposal will work. I think would benefit everybody. And we'll try to get that out too, I think. Talk more internally about that.
Leslie, do you have a question about logistics?
Kind of. I didn't realize you guys came back as quickly as you did, so I don't know if you covered this already. My question is regarding proposals on bid normalized load impacts for weather sensitive demand response. included or not?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, a proposal that accommodates weather sensitivity, I think that Eric might work on sharing some slides at the end about how what the CEC had proposed earlier this year accounted for weather sensitivity. But I would say that to the extent that your proposal addresses weather sensitive resources or some kind of adjustment for temperature, that would be great to include as part of your proposal.
Yeah, just like how we could go about doing that. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Should I try to speak to that quickly?
I guess I want to make sure that people are good on next steps first.
Sure.
I haven't seen anything in the chat, but if anyone has a question, you could raise your hand now. That would be great. Okay. It seems like people are feeling good about next steps. If you do have questions, feel free to email us after this and we'll try to get these slides out and maybe some examples too. I see Colin has a question. Oh, your hand went down.
Yes, that's because I unmuted.
Okay.
Want to make sure I just didn't leave it up indefinitely. I'm curious as we think about, the comments that we're going to provide for August 16th. This working group was set up in the last RA decision, presumably because upon review by the ED and others at the CPUC, the initial proposals coming out of the CEC's docket still needed refinement. I'm wondering if you can provide any context on, what specific elements of the CEC proposal prompted the need for this working group series to further refine the incentive-based QC methodology. Perhaps that's just the issues with overbidding that you already identified, but wanted to make sure that we covered all of the potential things that we want to address.
Yeah, I would say that the decision called out a couple of things for this working group to address in terms of elements of the proposal. So you mentioned this during the kickoff, but those things are the bid normalized load impact metric, the capacity shortfall penalty design, and then also how it would be enforced. These like particular kind of issues within each of those elements that we're highlighting here. The decision didn't go into great lengths about, what exactly about these different things needed to be addressed. But I think that we did feel that, from the last working group process, there were still some outstanding concerns along some of these lines that probably warranted further discussion, and that we didn't have a lot of opportunity to try to, focus on one proposal and how that could be improved. And so I think that's what we're hoping to do at this time. Does that help, Colin?
Well, I think this is a look. Besides the improvement aspects, wasn't there also something about testing, some kind of trial testing?
Yeah, so the decision also directed the Energy Division with support from CEC to do this what if analysis. So I think Daniel mentioned this at the beginning, but at the end of this process, we'll kind of have either one proposal or maybe a couple of proposals that we want to test against actual data. And we'll be working on that analysis between December and April of next year, and then bringing those results back to the working group. And then the kind of learnings from that will then be what informs the final joint proposal that will be submitted to the RA proceeding by next December. So I don't have that full timeline again in the slide deck, but we can share out the kickoff slides again if people want to see those after this meeting.
Thanks, Eleanor and Luke. Quick follow-up question on that. Will the structure of how that test period will function be discussed at all as part of these working groups?
Yeah, so I think that's something that we'll want to do probably as we're getting closer to the end. I think what we're thinking right now is that you know, once we kind of agree as a group about you know, a set of proposals that we would want to be tested, we'll probably go on a bit of a hiatus because it will take a lot of, you know, staff resources to do the analysis, and it's not you know, extremely conducive to having a really open process because there's a lot of market sensitive data. So I think we'll probably, you know, take a little bit of a break as we're running the analysis. But then once we have some results to share back, we'll probably try to meet one-on-one with IOUs and DRPs that are interested in seeing their results and getting feedback to see if they have questions about the analysis, and then present aggregated results back to the working group next year, probably around May.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. If anyone else has any logistical questions, again, you're welcome to email us. I think Eric might be ready to talk a little bit more about the normalized load impact. And if people want to stay on for that, they're welcome. Eric, do you have slides to present, or how do you
Sure,
want this?
yeah.
Okay.
All this up. So let me make this more visible for everyone. So basically, we're showing a graph here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Showing a graph here of bid normalized load impacts. I guess I should have labeled them bid normalized here as a function of temperature to sort of simulate a weather sensitive resource, an AC program or something like that. And we see this temperature sensitivity that is the outcome of a linear regression. And so the demonstrated capacity is the intersection of you know, this profile at the planning temperature, whatever that happens to be. And that gives you a capacity value. So I think just to connect a few different dots of things that came up earlier in the conversation. One is we'd really expect DRPs to you know, to be bidding their available capacity, not their qualifying capacity, right? What the most likely thing is that they can provide. And that's why you would get some lower values down at these cooler temperatures. But the idea is that we'll measure it under the planning temperature. So, you know, under the new slice of day paradigm, that would be the worst day planning temperature. And that would give you, you know, again, the capacity. So even though you know, maybe don't do so well on these cooler days, you do at least this well on the hotter days, maybe even better, but like really you just have to exceed this value. And so that's why when we talk about bid normalized load impacts, it's always about specific events. It's not directly determining the capacity, because again, you could get a really low bid normalized load impact value on a, you know, a moderate day. I think there is another sort of related point about let's see. I'm sort of forgetting what one of the other issues I wanted to address is. But the idea is that, you know, the bit normalized load impact metric that we're talking about is not the qualifying capacity value. It's just sort of an adjustment to the data points that are going to feed into this regression. So I'll pause there, see if there's any questions. That's really all I wanted to show.
And I guess I know that there was a more complicated version of this graph with slice of day.
Yeah, I guess the next one does show that you'd sort of do this for each hour. And in the original proposal, you know, I did recommend addressing take back. You know, but again, even though there's a few specific elements of the proposal that we're asked to address, you know, it's all sort of open for discussion. So welcome feedback and thoughts on that.
Look.
I'm wondering how this might impact bidding strategy. This 1 hour focus could it possibly incentivize bidding in such a way that you get only dispatch for 1 hour? And so you concentrate your performance in that 1 hour and not take a chance on longer dispatches?
Yeah, I think that's possible, and maybe that's something we should try to suss out when we do some examples, right, of like multi-hour examples of this. But I think with the guardrails in place, but I mean, I guess I am seeing your point that if you just tossed out the other, you know, tossed out the other hours, you might get some kind of higher results. So I'm going to take that as an action item as well.
I'd also just note there that the framing is a little. I might reframe that slightly in that DRPs aren't gambling here. Demand response providers not taking chances on, you know, longer dispatches, hoping that their resources will perform. They're bidding in such a way that they, you know, their bidding strategies are based around what their resources can perform, and so just reframing that slightly. That's, you know, we're not looking at like playing the lottery here. We want to make sure that we're bidding in such a way that we can deliver on that bid when it's if we are dispatched.
Yeah, go ahead.
But I mean, I just want to clarify my remark. I'm not casting any negative motivation or aspersion. I'm just going back on the premise. I'm going by on the premise that any measurement protocol or incentive protocol, you know, there's such a thing as rational behavior, and so I'm focusing on that rational behavior.
Yeah, and I guess just to add to that, I think maybe the tension that Alok is highlighting is that even though we're moving to this slice of day framework, you know, there is still an expectation that DR as an area resource will be available for 4 hours if needed. So I think we want to keep that in mind in the qualifying capacity assessment process. I think the other thing I just wanted to maybe remind people about, I know this was kind of coming up earlier, but I did want to note that the proposal so far is that the ex post quantity would feed into the ex ante, and that if your ex ante if your ex post is at least 90% of what your ex ante is requesting, that would get a streamlined approval process. And so there is kind of a built-in accountability mechanism, I would say, between the incentive-based approach and the QC values. I know that there were some concerns about, whether or not people are required to put things on supply plans, but I think that there is some built-in accountability with that 90% threshold. We have a couple more minutes if anyone has any other questions. Eric had a bunch of other slides that we could talk more about, beyond LI or some of these issues. I'd also say that I know that this is a lot to think about, and I think to the extent that this is, triggering some ideas about how to improve things, we'd love to see that turned into written proposals or comments. I see a question from Stephen though, and then one from Colin. Stephen, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Eleanor. This is Stephen Costello from the Public Advocate's Office. And more just a comment. When dealing with bids, I think something to consider is I think there needs to be some assurance that a particular resource can provide their maximum bid, like that it's been shown in a test or dispatch previous, especially if we're kind of grossing up partial dispatches, because there are numerous examples, instances in the past where resources bid more than they are capable of performing when dispatched. This might be more relevant to another part of this section, but I think we should keep that in mind. That's all.
Yeah, Stephen, I think that's a really good point. And I think Daniel made the point earlier in the presentation that really what we're trying to accomplish here is a balancing act, right, between over penalizing DR providers when they don't get a full dispatch on the one hand, and then sort of giving them too much benefit of the doubt if they get a small dispatch or perform to a relatively low dispatch. And so I think that's how I would encourage folks on this call to approach this task is a balancing act.
Colin, do you have a question? Comment?
Yes, I do. I think this is maybe going a bit off of what Steven just asked, but just as a maybe clarification point, is the primary reason that we're not just measuring performance based on what is dispatched because we want to kind of encourage or not to provide some compensation to DRPs that are making themselves more available than what is dispatched? Or are there other considerations there that I'm missing? I apologize if this has been answered already. I think I was spending a good part of the first bit of the meeting getting my arms around the formula, and so some of these might be repeated questions.
Yeah, I think the idea is that DR providers are submitting bid curves, right? Increasing megawatts at increasing prices, and so if you get dispatched for some of those megawatts but not for others, how do we both account for what you actually did? We want this to be performance based, but also to what you offered the market. And so if you're only dispatched for half of your bid, the idea is well, what do we think they would have done if the full bid was accepted? Sort of how I think of it.
Got it. Thank you.
Great. So we're right at 4:50. So I would say that unless anyone has a last minute question or a closing thought, we'll probably try to wrap up pretty soon. Again, thank you all for joining. We'll be sure to send out these slides, maybe with a couple of appendix slides from previous BNLI presentations, either after this meeting or probably tomorrow, since it's close to the end of the day. We'll try to send out some examples as soon as possible. I know that people are asking for those. I'm sure it will be helpful as you're trying to come up, with your own proposals and comments. And just as a reminder, we'll include this in the email as well. But if you are submitting a proposal or comments next week, please just send those to the working group leads and we'll make sure that it gets redistributed. Any final thoughts from Daniel, Eric, or any of our working group members?
I maybe just want to call out for the examples. We'll probably try to do versions of what we presented here, but as Eleanor said in the comments, we definitely invite people to come up with their own that are separate from what we've gone over. But hopefully that will give some clarity on some of these that we've gone over.
Yeah, I think my parting thought is please send us ideas. If they're not fully baked, feel free to reach out to us. We want this process to be collaborative. So, don't hold back.
I'll stop the recording.